Hi everyone, my name is Yesenia Rodriguez, and I'll be going over what I learned in APP 101-41, specifically when it comes to the comfort woman issue. Now, this system came to be because of the Japanese Imperial Army between 1930s and 1940s. During this time, women who were generally from countries like Korea, China, the Philippines, Taiwan, Indonesia, these women were forced into sexual slavery for the military. And so, what's disgusting about this is that there were locations where it was called comfort stations where these things would occur. Now, the reason why I went with this topic is for many reasons, but specifically because it still has such a painful and political influential today. And so this happened in East Asian history, and it continues to shape the diplomacy, public memory, nationalism, women's rights, and even Asian American advocacy today. And so, with understanding this issue, it does help us to better understand the political climate in that area, as well as the historical trauma that occurred and how it's still continuing to have impact in their generation to come and the generations after. Now, during Japan's imperial expansion, which occurred across Asia, the military authorities established these stations specifically near battle stations and also across occupied territories. With these stations, women were stocked very similar to the way that you would stock your pantry. And so ultimately, they were told that they were going to be working in factories, but they were lied to. Instead, they were forced into sexual servitude. Many of them who were physically abused, they were assaulted repeatedly, they were exposed to STDs, and also a lot of them faced starvation. Now, with the survivors that actually made it back home, a lot of the times they weren't supposed to talk about it or silenced about it because of the social stigma. And so, what I learned through historian Sarah So was that she explained that at these stations, they were operated militarily. And so, that left women with no legal protection, with no political protection at all either. And so, we find women were very vulnerable during this time. The violence we learned, it wasn't random. It was systematic, it was organized, and ultimately it was justified by wartime demands. And so to tie this back into Mason's short history of Asia, they tend in this book we tended to highlight the scars that it left and how it never fully healed. And so even after liberation, Korea remained distrustful of Japan, rightfully so. And so it does connect very tightly to the national identity, to the political division, as well as the tension in modern diplomacy. Now, how the United States comes into play is more of an indirect role. The U.S. did occupy forces, but didn't fully investigate the comfort woman system during World War II. The U.S. later shaped the post-war diplomacy and the division of Korea. Today, the comfort woman memorials are shown in places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and also specifically the Asian trauma that came to be, and why it's an important Asian American history memory there. And so the comfort woman is not just something that was slightly touched. It's something that is very, very deeply ingrained. And so the distrust comes from the apology never really truly being sincere from Japan because it was constantly changing, and also the narrative that we see in history books. So that's ultimately where the distrust comes with is just a lot of inconsistency. And so when finally survivors were strong enough to give their testimonies, it brought a lot of global attention to specifically women's rights and the sexual violence during wartime. the gender inequalities, as well as how power had a lot of it to do during this time. And so we also see that a lot of times the crimes that happen against women are not really justified until decades later, or even acknowledged that they happen. And so the movement does force governments to shed some light on these uncomfortable truths, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And so you just can't ignore it any longer. Now, with that being said, the statues alone are just not enough to be able to forget everything that happened in the past. What we see here is that it actually creates unresolved issues that prevents countries like Japan, Korea, and China to fully cooperate with one another. Overall, if Japan really took full ownership of what happened, we would probably see that these countries would have a better understanding, better communication, and just be able to cooperate and be able to be fruitful. Ultimately, with them not backtracking, it would help to improve the trust between these countries. And ultimately just justifying everything that happens to women during this time and acknowledging that that's not the correct way to go about it. Building trust is ultimately how we will be able to move forward as a human race. Now, with that being said, that's all I have today. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of your class. Bye now.